Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. As-salatu was-salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen. Allahumma allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika 'ilman wa ta'liman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So inshallah, today will be the last lesson, inshallah. Um, so he says vices, we went through the vices of the heart, etc. Now it says vices of the eye. Does these include looking at the members of the opposite sex with whom you're not allowed to look at? And this is a really, really huge thing in our time. Particularly for those who, inshallah, today will be the last class, inshallah. Maybe we can do something else like last week, next week, but this will be the last class of the book, inshallah. So it's a major issue, right? So just in terms of the basic fiqh of it, everybody agrees you cannot look at lust at anything other than your spouse, right? So, so then so the default on the Shafi school is you cannot look at the opposite sex, period, right? Unless there's some kind of necessity. Border patrol, identifying somebody in a car accident, witness in court, that kind of thing, right? You cannot look at somebody, their face, can't look at their hands. That is the Shafi school, right? That's the relied upon position. A weaker yet followable position, the Shafi school allows you to look at the face and hands of a woman or anything other than between the navel and the knee of a man, without lust and with, right? And so when they say without lust, meaning that there's no fitna, and there's definitely no fitna, right? It's not 50-50. So if it's 50-50, that's not halal either. And so Al-Bajuri, living about 150 years ago in Egypt, he says, nowadays with so many women in the street and it being such a common thing to do, it's a position we should follow, perhaps, right? That it's very difficult to work with people, not look at them in the face, for example. It's very, very hard. And so anyway, you should be very, very, very careful, because the line is, the reason why the relied upon position is that you can't look is because it's a very slippery slope. It's a very slippery slope. And so the whole point of the Sharia is to stop slippery slopes, right? And so there's many people you could look at it be kind of 50-50, right? What does 50-50 mean? And then when it becomes 50-50, you might look at them this way, you may look at them that way, right? And so it's a very dangerous thing to do, right? And so I just want to, I don't want to shock anybody, but just kind of like to share this, this quote just as a kind of a paradigm, right? So this looks like, where is this gone? So this is a quote from here from it's talking about something. It's a totally different thing here about. So this is from about I would say 300 years ago in Iran, approximately Sunni Iran, I believe at that time. Allahu Alam. So it says from Ad-Dawani, Shafi'i. He said, So we're talking about command the right and forbidding the wrong. So he says, command the right follows along with that which is commanded to do. So if commanding the right is to do with something that is obligatory, then it is obligatory to command someone to do it. And if it's something that's recommended, then it's recommended to command them to do it. And if they're doing something haram, then it's obligatory to stop them doing it. And if they're doing something makruh, then it's sunnah to stop them doing it. And he says, shartuhu, the condition is that it doesn't cause more harm. And he says, and if it's going to cause more harm, it's not obligatory, nor is it sunnah, etc. But it could actually be haram because it might cause more harm, right? It says, so in that scenario, what should you do then? The only way for you to be away from the haram is like you can't even say anything about it. He says, بَلْ يَلْزَمُهُ أَنْ لَا يَحْضُرَ مُنْكَرٍ. Rather, he should not be there. Like you can't stop people drinking alcohol, don't be with them. وَيَعْتَزِلُ فِي بَيْتِهِ, and he should stay home. لِأَلَّا يَرَاهُ, so that he doesn't see it. Right, so looking at sin is also sin. Right, so remember I used to skateboard, and most skateboarding is haram. Right, why do you think that's the case, Nadir?
Not sure.
So most skateboarding is you do street skating, right? Which is you're gonna go into like, for example, a school, an abandoned school or school during the, and or go
Oh,
to,
and they don't want you there.
right? And they don't want you there, right? They say a sign, no skateboarding, you're like, that's the best place to skate, right? You're going to mess up people's property. That's part of the attitude, right? It's kind of renegade culture of the skateboarder, right? And so I can remember, I had a bus stop, I used to, when I come out of high school, and people would skateboard there, right? And so there'd be some guys who are really good skateboarders, but I would not look at them because it's haram to look at the haram, right? Somebody who is doing the haram, you cannot look at it, right? Unless you need to, right? I need to find out what's going on. But for example, that's why, most TV then is haram to watch because that's what you show, right? Most television is that. So he says, لِأَلَّا يَرَاهُ, so he doesn't see it. وَلَا يَخْرُجْ إِلَّا لِلضَّرُورَةِ, and he should not leave his house except under duress, right? Um, and he says, وَلَا يَلْزَمُهُ مُفَارَقَةِ تِلْكَ الْبَلْدَةِ, he doesn't have to leave that country, for example, the West, إِلَّا إِذَا كَانَ عُرْضًا لِلْفَسَادِ, unless he is vulnerable to corruption, right? And so he talks about right. So this is what we're talking about, right? Like if you live basically anywhere in the world today, you're going to see the haram left, right, and center, right? So the basic fatwa that he's giving is stay home. So now the question is the phone, right? The screen. So somebody's talking about the screen, like. So here, like, I don't know what scholars of the past would have think, because if they saw the internet, saw television, like how would they respond to it? Because it's on a totally different order of business. They're talking about scenarios where, I'm trying to see if there's another quote here. I can't find it now, but so the phone is a very, very dangerous thing. The phone and the internet is a very, very dangerous thing. Someone who doesn't view it as dangerous, television, the internet, right? They really totally lost, right? So do we come along and say the phone is haram? Living in the world is haram. Everything's haram. No, because it's not possible, right? It's a principle in fiqh. When everything becomes haram, then everything becomes halal. That's a principle, right? You know, but there's a big difference between somebody, for example, let's say, for example, they know that whatever they buy, they support a certain country, for example, right? Not to mention any particular name, right? Or if they know that wherever they go, they're going to see this, or whatever happens is going to be the case, right? But there's a big difference in someone who just takes it as like, oh, this is fine, as opposed to someone who's like, this is really concerning, right? Like they know, for example, so we need to be very careful because all of these things are destroying us. And so the phone, the computer, television, these should all be taken as very, very deadly devices that are used under very, very strict need, right? With strict things, image block, extreme selection, this, selection that. Say, oh, I'm on YouTube and I just couldn't be bothered to spend on, what's it called, to sign up for premium, so I don't have the adverts. Oh, I just saw this. It's like, brother, sister, you're seeing things that you shouldn't see on a regular basis, not a one-off, right? Everyone's going to see something one time in their life, but the amount of haram that you've seen and the way it's presented, again, it's like surprise, surprise, we have problems in our heart, right? And so, the kind of level of fitna is like is ridiculous. And so we really have to we have to see it as it is and be practical, right? But practical doesn't mean it's all fine. Like it's not all fine. It's not all wonderful and great, right? And so the general principle is anything that normally leads to haram is haram. So that's the general principle, right? So if you say, oh, if I go to this place at this time, I'm going to see this, then it's going to be haram. As opposed to it may lead to, well, if I leave my house, I may see this. Yeah, you may see many things, but if it normally the case, right? So going to a place where sin happens, or going to a place where you would normally see sin, right? Let's say, for example, a swimming pool or something like that, or whatever it is. Like you're normally going to see that. That's the normal case to see haram, right? And so it's not halal to do that, right? And so we have to, be careful while being practical, right? And we should, the Prophet ﷺ asked the question, say, what are you going to do? What will you do when you see halal as haram and haram as halal? And that's where we are right now, really, right? We don't really see it as a big deal. We don't find it's not a kind of issue, right? At the same time, the Muslims lived in majority non-Muslim countries for the beginning of Islam, right? The Salaf, they were like that. They lived in majority non-Muslim countries. It was a Muslim country with majority non-Muslim. Hassan Basri was asked, they said, these Ajam, these non-Arabs, they walk around topless, these females, they walk around topless, what should we do? And he said, oh, just look away, right? So they were in a similar scenario. But it's a big difference between, oh, I had to see that at the supermarket while I was shopping. Oh, I had to see that at my house. It's not my choice. As opposed to, I went, you got to be very careful, right? Anybody who, for example, any search engine, what's going to come up if you type certain things. And so you should be really, really careful, like put image, okay, I'm going to type these words, put image block on. I was like, oh, I don't have image block. Well, why don't I have image block? Right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Somebody who like knows how dangerous these things are, right? So treating it and very, very careful. Same thing, the office should be very dangerous. I go to the office, there's this and this and this. I'm in control of this, I'm not in control of this, but I'm dead scared, right? That's the proper attitude, as opposed to, oh, it's all fine, right? So looking at members of the opposite sex whom are not allowed to look at, looking at private things, right? Looking with scorn at a Muslim, looking at disdain, right? This is haram. Hatred, right? Looking into someone's house without permission. Similarly, for example, you're standing behind somebody and they're looking at their phone and you look at their screen, right? Would they like you to look at their screen? Like, do they mind? Right? Or they would not. So it's the same kind of thing as private, right? Asking private questions, making people feel awkward that they have to answer, right? And you shouldn't do that. Prying, shouldn't do that. Vices of the ear, these things include listening to backbiting, other things which are haram. So again, music today, it's a huge problem, right? Music itself is a problem, and then a lot of music is super inappropriate. Like it says things, and that's just stuck in your head, right? You have to be very careful, right? Vices of the hand, these include cheating in weighing and measuring, deceiving and stealing, right? Not doing your job properly. Sins of the feet, these include walking to somewhere where one will spread slander about a Muslim, or kill or harm without legitimate reason, or everything else which is haram to walk to. So walking to do the haram is haram. Walking into a place that is built for haram, like a bank, okay, like a nightclub, like a bar, like a winery, like I don't know, something like that. So going to a bank, you can only go into a bank if you need to, right? You cannot go in with your spouse. If your spouse is fine outside, they cannot go inside the bank. The place is built for sin, can't go there, right? The same thing with the bank, right? The bank is a place of sin. It is bad. Having a bank account is bad. It is in principle haram, right? To have a bank account, because you are lending money to a bank and knowing that they're going to lend it out to other people at interest, right? So it's only halal because you have no choice, right? But there's a big difference, again, for the same thing. There's a big difference in somebody who is grudgingly opening a bank account, and grudgingly they have to deal with these things, and it's not my choice, and there's no other way for me to do business. I can't get my salary in pieces of gold, of course. I can't put gold under my bed, of course, right? As opposed to somebody who just feels comfortable with it. Like, oh, it's all fine, right? It's all fine. It's not all fine. Like, it's something that you really don't like, but there's no way out, right? It's like, these kind of scenarios, right? Am I making sense to everybody? So there should be a lot of pain, and there should also be a lot of happiness. Pain that you see the haram, happiness that alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, you hate the haram. Right? So you should thank Allah when you see the haram and you hate it. You should say alhamdulillah rabbil alameen, because it's a huge thing. You should be happy that you hate the haram. You should be sad when you see the haram and happy that you're sad when you see the haram. Does that make sense? Right? Like, alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, I'm still sane. Right? There's other people who really don't care. And I care. That's a huge ni'mah from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be aware, right? And to have that blessing of like, I hate what Allah hates. It's a huge ibadah, right? And so that's the ibadah that's happening today. We see a lot of things that Allah hates and we say, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen. At least I have that feeling, which is good. Vice of the private parts include zina, homosexuality, masturbation, other such things, right? And here I wanted to share something. Two things, basically. One is that it is agreement of the former dhahib that masturbation is haram, right? And so you may have or will hear other things, unfortunately, spread among people. And I don't want to talk about any particular people, but there are certain people who are very, very popular and they don't promote extremism, but they promote kind of like the idea that deen is easy and there's different of opinion, which is true, and deen is easy, and you can follow any madhab you like, which is true. But they say things in ambiguous ways, right? They say things in ambiguous ways. So I've seen this, for example, there's a book, the book's name is Agenda to Change Our Condition. So I believe that's the word, right? I don't want to mention the author of the book. But anyway, so Agenda to Change Our Condition. So it mentions in it that the Hanbalis allow this, right? The Hanbalis do not allow it, right? The Hanbalis do not allow it. The Hanbalis allow certain things when in times of duress, right? In terms of duress, in terms of like life and death, or like, so the example that the Hanbalis give is the Hanbalis say that in Dar al-Harb, in a non-Muslim country, you cannot get married. Okay, you cannot get married in a non-Muslim country according to the Hanbalis, right? Is that the fatwa that they give today? Allahu A'lam, but that's the default in the Hanbali school. So they said, what if somebody were living in a non-Muslim country and they're not able to get married? And what if the suppression that they caused, the physical suppression they caused, would result in bodily harm? So they say in that scenario, yes, right? Which is obviously the case. Anything that's haram becomes halal if there's bodily harm. Like if you need to drink alcohol in order to save yourself, then you can do it, right? If you need to, I don't know, you need to take your mind away, right? So for example, taking general anesthetic is in principle haram. You cannot do that, right? Izalatul aql, taking mind-altering drugs like general anesthetic is haram, but it's halal because of duress. So when somebody says it like that, it's like, well, of course that's halal. Like anybody would say that's halal, right? Generally speaking, right? So here they're talking about something else, but it's not talking about a normal human being who is not able to experience certain things that the body normally needs, and then they do something like that, right? It is haram according to the form of dhahib, right? And so it's very dangerous when people spread things in a very like loose and nebulous way, right? Allahu A'lam. And of the sins of the private parts as well is for a man not to try his best to satisfy his wife, and for a wife to refuse to be available for her husband. It's also haram, right? And so, these are basic things. There's basic things of rahmah and respect. So from the point of view of the husband, it's an issue of rahmah, right? This woman, she only has one husband, and so if you don't help her, then what on earth is she supposed to do, right? And in respect for the husband, fear Allah concerning your husband. The Prophet mentioned in many Sahih hadiths, that it's totally haram to say no. You cannot refuse. You can talk in a nice way and say, I'm really not in the mood. It's very difficult right now. Given that happened, the conversation we had today, it's very hard for me to do that. Whatever it is. And the husband should be accommodating, of course. But at the end of the day, it's haram to just say no. Like you can't do that, right? So your body does not belong to you, right? Your body does not belong to you, right? And so when a woman gets married, her body belongs to her husband. And so it's theft, basically, right? It's an issue of theft. And so may Allah protect us all and give us akhlaq and fear of Allah, right? We need good character and mercy and consideration from the husband point of view, and we need fear of Allah from the wife point of view. Okay, vices the whole body. These include unruliness towards one's parents, for example. So example of that would be you live with your parents and you just want to go and live on another side of the world. Why? I don't want to live with my parents. Okay, why don't you want to live with your parents? For no reason, right? So you can't do that. You can't just leave your parents for no reason. Or, for example, go in jihad when it's not personally obligatory. Or risk your life. For example, you want to be a firefighter. And your parents like, I do not want you to be a firefighter. You can't do that. You say, no, I'm going to do it anyway. That's haram. You can't do that, right? Unless it's personally obligatory. Fleeing from the battle lines, which is considered one of the major sins. Other things that may be included, cutting off family ties, right? And abusing other people's rights, parking on someone's drive without their permission, right? Etc. And so he concludes in a very beautiful qunut of the Shafi'is, right? This comes in a Sahih Hadith, Tirmidhi and other places, I believe, that that kind of summarizes the whole book, right? It's a dua from the Prophet ﷺ. And this is from, I believe, Sayyidina Hassan, I believe, narrating from Sayyidina Ali, Allahu Alam, or one of Ahl Bayt, anyway, narrating from Sayyidina Ali, that this was taught to him for in the Qunut al-Witr. He used to say, Allahumma hdini fi man hadayt, wa afini fi man afayt, wa tawallani fi man tawallayt. Let's read the translation afterwards. وبارك لنا فيما أعطيت وقنا شر ما قضيت إنك تقضي ولا يقضى عليك وإنه لا يذل من واليت ولا يعز من عاديت تباركت ربنا وتعاليت فلك الحمد على ما قضيت ولك الشكر على ما أنعمت به وأوليت ونستغفرك ونتوب إليك وصلى الله على خير خلقه محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم. So, O Allah, guide me among those you have guided, or guide us. These are all. So in the group prayer, say, Allahumma hdina, guide us. By yourself, you say, Allahumma hdini. So guide us among those you have guided. Restore us to a state of well-being among those you have restored to a state of well-being. Afiyah. Befriend me, look after me, take me under your wing among those you have befriended. Bless me with increase among those you have blessed with increase. Keep away any evil that you have ordained. For surely you ordain and you are not ordained upon. Nobody chooses over you. And surely you do not they are not put down who you have befriended, and they are not empowered those who you have taken as enemies. You are blessed and exalted. All praise belong to you for what you have ordained. And to you is thanks for what you have bestowed upon us. We seek forgiveness and we turn to you. And then you close with blessings on the Prophet ﷺ, his family and companions. Right? And it says the translation was completed on the 7th of Jumada Athani, 1412, which is the 15th of December 1991. So what, 30 odd years ago, by Abdulaziz Ahmed, who is indebted to everyone who helped him. This is Abdulaziz Fredericks. He lives in Scotland. Very, very amazing person. So that is the end of the book. There's a glossary there. One thing as well we can add to the body is traveling, right? So traveling to do sin of the body. Traveling, for example, let's say you have debt, okay, and you need to work, but you just don't do it. Or you have an agreement that you're going to turn up to work tomorrow, but you just don't. So like, I need you to be there. Are you going to be there? Yes. Okay, and then you just don't turn up. Right? It's haram to do that, right? Or a woman traveling without a mahram, right? And I believe we spoke about that before, that a woman can travel without a mahram if she is safe for a dire need. Like the only way she can learn is to do that. The only way she can change as a person is to be in the company of righteous people. She has to travel by herself. The only way for her to be safe, right? So she escaped from prison, from some kind of oppressive prison concentration camp. May Allah protect us. And then she's traveling. So she travels. She leaves the city and travels by herself. Can she do that? Of course, because she's traveling from danger to a safer situation. Traveling for work, she doesn't have anybody to support her, right? And her father says, I'm not going to support you, right? And so father is not obliged to support her after the age of puberty, right? As long as she's able to make make an income. So for example, she's 18 now and her father is not obliged to support her. And so she can travel for work in order to support herself. So she can commute, etc., for work in order to do that. And then we mentioned before that certain modern scholars that they've said that yes, there's duress, right? but there's certain things that are kind of like duress as well. So pressing need, right? Certain modern scholars kind of added like pressing need. Let's say, for example, visiting her sick mother, right? Something like that, or something really important, as opposed to just traveling for fun, right? So a woman just traveling for interest, like there's no, you can't do that, right? So some kind of pressing need it would be really difficult if you didn't do it, right? So what does that, let's say, for example, she needs to go and see somebody, and it would cost a ridiculous amount of money to have somebody go with her. It'd be really, really hard, and it'd be really difficult if she didn't go and see that person, right? I don't know. So لكل حادثة حديث, right? Every situation has its own kind of practical thing, but it's kind of the basic picture. Okay, any questions or queries? No questions or queries?
Sheikh, Assalamu alaikum. Can you clarify the part about the woman not owning her body after marriage?
So what does that mean? It means that nobody owns your own body, right? You don't own your own body. Your body belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so in the West, we have this mentality that it's my body, my right. Okay, this I own my body. I can do whatever I want with it. As long as I'm not harming somebody else, I can do that, right? And that's a basic kind of like assumption for anybody, right? They'll be like, it's my body, like, so nobody can tell me what I can or cannot eat, or I can or cannot go. I'm a free human being. But that is not the case. You do not own your body. Your body belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed you to do certain things with it and not to do other things with it. Allowed you to go certain places, not go certain, we're all slaves. And so the Prophet ﷺ, he told us, he said that marriage is a form of in bondage, it's a form of slavery. So be very careful when you marry your daughter off to somebody, right? And so just on a kind of on a very like basic level, like, okay, I'm now married, I'm a woman. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna go to work. It's like the husband's like, no, I don't want you to leave the house. She's like, well, why? It's like, I just don't want you to leave. So a normal, healthy relationship would be there's a discussion, why, how, what's the plan, they come up with a kind of a mutual agreement. But at the end of the day, she cannot leave the house without her husband's permission, right? Unless there's some kind of like, under duress. So in terms of mobility, it's like, oh, it's like that's actually the case, right? So there's a big difference between somebody exercising that right, and they're like, no, don't leave the house, which should kind of be a bit annoying, but it's like that is a fundamental thing, right? Like if I now know I cannot leave without my husband's right, that's a huge thing, right? I want to fast. I can't fast without my husband's permission. Go, well, why? Why do I need to ask my husband? Like, who is he? Like God or something? No, but he has rights to my body, and so I need to ask him. Like tomorrow I'm gonna fast. Is that okay? Right? And so the same thing is like when we talk about when we talk about intimacy, for example, it's like in principle, it'd be a bit weird if things were forced, right? Because it doesn't really work like that. But at the end of the day, she doesn't have the right to say no, right? She doesn't have the right to say no. And the Prophet, for example, mentioned, various hadiths that, even if she were about to give birth, right, as a hyperbole, right? So the ulama say, obviously, a woman's about to give birth, that's like, it's an issue of harm. But this scenario is like if a woman was about to give birth, or even if she's in the middle of cooking something and the thing's like gonna burn, or the thing's gonna be like ruined, it's like she can't say no, right? And so that's a key right. It does change the dynamic, right? So even if you say, yeah, fine, we're going to be easy going about these things and not going to be dictatorial, but it is the end of the day is like that is what you have signed up for. Like when you get married, you have said, I now accept that I cannot leave the house without my husband's permission. That's what it means. When I get married, it means I've now said that my body is now accessible to him at any time, as long as it doesn't harm me physically or clearly emotionally, like it's not going to give me like psychological problems immediately, right? And so that's a huge shift, huge paradigm shift from the way it's viewed in the West, right? It's like a totally different thing. Like what is it, how can a husband cannot say whether or not the woman can leave the house? What are you talking about? Like, what am I, your slave or something? Like, what are you talking about? Or like, you can't demand things like that. Like, that's ridiculous. So, and there's other, we can talk about these things in more depth. And I do talk about this in more depth in, I have a whole, what's it called? Whole playlist on marriage and Islam and all these kind of things and talk about intimacy and dynamics, etc. But it is fundamentally, on a fundamental level, it's like there is a difference, right? Between I have to listen to this person or I do not have to listen to this person. Like there's a shift between I'm this person has proposed to me and now they're asking, hey, should we meet up and talk and discuss things? You are now on this level of yes or no, I can choose. But then it's like now I'm married to this person, I cannot actually say no to them. Like that's quite a big statement. It's quite a big thing. Does that make sense? Nadir, does that make sense?
Yes, Sheikh, that makes sense. Jazakallah khair.
So, there's a very famous hadith where there was a woman who's her husband, her father trying to get her married, and she's saying no. And then the Prophet's like saying, like, why are you saying no? And she's saying, like, basically the Prophet explains to her what the rights are. And she's like, no, I'm not gonna get married. Like, if that's what it means, like if that's the kind of haqq that is now due on me if I get married, I'm not gonna do it. I don't want to do it. Right. And that's why, generally speaking, the ulama, they agree that you cannot, somebody who has already been married, you cannot force them to get married because now they know, like they know exactly what is marriage. So now you cannot force, nobody can force them to get married, right? Nobody can force them to get married, right? Because they now know, like, I know what marriage is, and I understand the pros and cons. I don't want to do it because it's too much, right? And so it's so as I mentioned, it takes tact, mercy, understanding from men, but for many women, it's just like that's just not even in their head to begin with. They don't look at their husband in that kind of way, right? So yes, it's a teamwork, right? But there is a limit, right? There is a limit to teamwork. It's like at the end of the day, I cannot actually say no to this person, and if I do, I'm sinful, right? As the Prophet said, any man that asks his wife and then she says no, the angels curse her until the morning. It's like that's a problem, right? It's not a joke, right? And many people they kind of like they shy away from this kind of stuff or they don't talk about it or whatever it is. But it's like we're trying to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a huge thing. Right? It's a huge thing. It's not a small thing at all. Inshallah, I hope that makes sense. But again, please look at if you go on my YouTube channel, look at the playlists. Inshallah, it's a whole playlist on marriage. You can if you get to the rights and responsibilities, it'll tell you right at the beginning, don't do the rights and responsibilities, go back, listen to the whole thing. It's useful. Gives you a lot of context, a lot of different things. But it's important to understand there are limits, right? It's like the fard prayer, right? So the fard prayer, like even if you don't feel it, even if you're not focused, even if it's just really not the time and the place and anything, you do have to pray it. Like you just have to do that. And there's a big difference between the fard and the sunnah from that point of view, right? The default is you should focus in both. You should love to pray in both. It should be something that you want to do, right? The dhuhr comes in, you really want to pray. Like it's now Maghrib, I want to pray. I want this class to end and I want to pray Maghrib, right? But that's not necessarily the case. What if I don't want to pray Maghrib? Right? And so we live in a society, in the West at least, where any limitation on us is considered impossible, right? Even I think in civil law anyway, they have a principle is you cannot force people to do work. So you can force people to pay, So listen, I paid you to do work, but you can't actually force somebody to do work, right? You can't actually do that, right? So the concept of forcing somebody to do something is considered totally immoral in our Western paradigm. Whereas in Islam, there are certain things you can force people to do, right? Like you cannot do this or you have to do this, and this is very important, right? And so you know, it's a huge paradigm shift that we have to understand. Okay, any other questions?
I have another, but I don't want to keep you from Maghrib, Sheikh.
No, Bismillah, Bismillah, go. We should go for another 10 minutes or so.
I guess I was just thinking this. We just finished this book on Shafi'i fiqh, and I was thinking of the class you're doing on pluralism also, and we were talking about specifically. It doesn't have to just be that example, but the opinion on masturbation. But the scholars in the West, or you'll hear many different opinions. So as somebody's trying to think of, this is a correct understanding. It's not the only understanding. How do we think within the framework of madahib and what is correct and what is acceptable versus that kind of another layer or another sphere of opinions and things that we hear that we have to be able to say that is not correct, and it's being non-scholars too, being laymen.
Yeah. So I want to take an analogy. Let's do an analogy with education. Okay. So education. So in America, you do not have a choice whether or not your kids do education, right? So it is considered immoral and illegal to not have your children educated. It is a human right for them to be educated. Okay. Then, so now what they'll do then is they will offer free education through a state school, right? This is the kind of analogy of standard, what we feel is standard education that people should get. If you don't want to do that in certain states in America, you can go through certain legal steps and say, I will educate my child. And then you just have to prove that you're doing something. Now, the state will not fund you. They do not approve of what you're doing necessarily, but you just have to show some basic things like here's a transcript. What did my child do? A, B, and C, right? And if there's clearly no education happening whatsoever, they will get involved, right? As because it's the right of the child to be educated. So that's kind of the analogy, right? There is the mu'tamad. There's like, what is, if I'm going to give an answer, what am I going to say? And if I'm going to do something, what is right and wrong? And so here are the former madhahib. Here are thousands of scholars. They've worked with a certain system. There is plurality, meaning there's different answers. But there are certain answers that over time they've said that's just not really. We're not gonna put taxpayers' money into that. Like we're not gonna sign that off. Right? Now, if you want to go and do it, that's up to you. I'm not going to give the fatwa. It's not halal to give that fatwa, and these things. But is it to the stage that I'm going to arrest you or like call you? So as I was saying, is it rest to the stage where now going to call you a kafir? Like no, I'm not going to call you a kafir, right? And so when that class that I was giving on pluralism, inshallah, I want to re-record it. Inshallah, is just setting the stage that there's more than one answer, but it does not talk about what is a relied upon answer. And so the next 4 lectures that I was doing, for example, with that organization, inshallah ta'ala, is what has marja'iyah, what has authenticity, what's reliable, right? So what's a reliable answer? So now I'm trying to get funding for to have my child memorize a Shakespeare play. The state, the government is not going to give me taxpayers' money to do that. We don't consider that reliable. That is not good education. That's not how your child should learn English. I'm saying, no, that's what my child's doing, memorizing a Shakespeare play. That's the best thing I think is for him. They're not going to give me taxpayer pay. If they want to go and do it, if they want to go and do it, do it. So there are all sorts of positions out there, right? And you're not a kafir if you apply that position. But in terms of what's reliable, that's a different kettle of fish, right? So does that make sense? That kind of analogy. The same thing with medicine, right? Like Am I allowed to shoot myself in the head? No, it's illegal, right? Suicide is illegal. Okay, I have stage 4 cancer. Can I, for example, refuse to do what they're going to do? Yeah. And I'm going to go and do some kind of other thing. I'm going to meditate. Okay, fine. Am I going to get taxpayers' money to meditate? No, I'm not. Because that's not standard medication for stage 4 cancer. So we're not going to pay you for that, but it's up to you. If you try and shoot yourself, that is, as far as I know, illegal. Like you cannot shoot yourself, right? Nor can you try and kill your children. But if your child is sick, there are certain freedoms that they're going to give you. Like it's up to you to do what you feel is best. But there's only certain things they're gonna actually espouse and promote, right? So when you say orthopraxy, right, what is like something that is a legitimate answer? Form of madhahib, right? These are the form of madhahib, and these are the systems that have existed, and that's the breadth of your pluralism in terms of what you should do. In terms of what you can do whatever you want. It's up to you, right? And so that's the whole problem with, for example, I don't like to use terms at all, but certain people who just follow Quran and Sunnah, and they're not comparing against the heritage that exists, the danger of going into fringe opinions intentionally or unintentionally is very much there. Like you have no system that you're working with. And so you end up saying crazy things. And it's very dangerous. And so the problem is then for the layman, like it's problematic, and it's for the scholar, it's very problematic because you know that people are doing something that is very, very risky. And there's very little evidence to support this, or a lot of evidence against it, and yet it's happening, right? So pluralism is not one answer. There's more than one answer. But then when you study the history of Islamic fiqh and all these things, you say, no, form of madhahib, definitely. That is the scope that you have. Stick to the form of madhahib. If it goes out the form of madhahib, I'm not saying you're a kafir. I'm not saying you might even have some types of, you're not a fasiq necessarily, but you're doing something extremely dangerous. And you're on your own. It's very, very dangerous. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Jazakallah khair.
Yeah. So, when you talk about like minority fiqh, and minority fiqh has these issues where they mention things that, it's like, I don't know, it's very dangerous. Like in principle, it's fine. In practice, it's wrong. I'll give you an example, right? The Shafi scholars, they mention you can follow the ikhtiyarat, the independent opinions of independent Shafi'is, right? So there are certain Shafi'i scholars who have had opinions that disagree fundamentally with the Shafi school, right? For example, Ibn Mundhir, he said, a woman who was on a period, she can go to the masjid, it's fine. Okay. So that's in theory. So I say, you Shafi said that I can follow the independent opinions of certain Shafi scholars like Ibn Mundhir or Suyuti or whatever. And then I found this fatwa. And then when you actually bring it to the muftis, they're like, no, because we don't really know what he's saying. And there's this problem and that problem and this problem. So when it comes down to it, there's a lot of danger when you go out on a limb. Like you don't know what's going on. And it's very risky. And so that's why when you say something, for example, this is the relied upon position, you know there's something solid, as opposed to something that's, that's fringe, right? And you find all sorts of, you can find every kind of fatwa basically if you go to fringe. It's kind of, that's why who was it? Dr. Ramadan Bulti has a book called Allah Madhabiyya Qantarat Allah Diniyya. Not following the form of madhahib is the bridge to no deen, because that's where it will lead eventually, right? It'll eventually lead, and I speak about that in my playlist on halal food, right? There are lots of positions out there, right? There's lots of positions out there. But if you start following fringe opinions, you will have no deen eventually, right? You'll have no deen. And so, we have to, there's an adab, and there is a level of taqwa and a level of caution that's required, and a level of thoroughness that's required in order to not totally get derailed, right? Which anybody in any system would appreciate, right? Anybody in any appreciate, like in medicine, in principle, you could do this and this, but we don't because it's dangerous. In principle, in the military, we could do this and this, but we don't because it's dangerous. In engineering, in principle, you could do this and this, but we don't because it's dangerous. In academics, in education, in psychiatry, there's lots of things that in principle you could do. But when you come down to it, you ask the people who are specialists in the fields, like, no, that's way too dangerous. Don't do that. right? That's too dangerous. And so the same thing in fiqh, right? And so now we have these kind of two kind of, so if you look at a neo-traditionalist, if that's a, or traditionalist, I don't know what that really means, but someone who says form madhahib, you're going to have these two sides and two main kind of groups pulling away from this. People who say Quran and Sunnah only, which is very dangerous, and then people who say no, it's not just a form of madhahib, there are other positions, which is also very dangerous. It's not in itself, it's not fundamentally off, right? The form of madhahib are not deen, right? They are a version of the deen. But the issue is anything outside of the form of madhahib there's a huge question mark around it. It's a huge question mark around it, right? Let alone things within the form of madhahib. There are certain things within the form of madhahib, there's question marks around them. So does that help, Nadir?
Yes, Jazakallah khair. That helps a lot. I just wonder, and for future conversations, inshallah, just and we talked about this years ago when you did a class on moon sighting and Eid. There was just what does that mean for community? You know, what does that mean around community when many communities are not centered in that definition you gave of pluralism, and so maybe it just means you have to be more careful about the community you pick.
Yeah. So what it means,
it's almost like you have a physical community and then you have this other maybe spiritual or knowledge-based community. Like you're in California, I'm in Chicago, and you're my community as far as being aligned intellectually and spiritually, and as far as a madhab, whereas my physical community is not aligned with that. You know, so
yeah.
Just the things that brings
So
up.
I mean, so what it means on two levels, like on the level of the individual, is it just being accepting, right? Like I accept and I value you, as opposed to I don't value you. You're doing something different. I don't value you. Like I don't see the hurma and the sanctity of what you're doing, as opposed to I do, right? If I see a Salafi or a Shi'i, I say him, yeah, or a modernist. There is a sanctity in what they're doing, right? They are trying to follow. They are trying to follow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At the end of the day, there is a wilaya, like there's a care and concern that they have for Allah, and a care and concern that Allah has for them, and I recognize that. But I would never agree with them, right? And on the leadership level, that's where it gets a big issue, right? On the leadership level, like your Islamic school, for example, where I am a board member, is like, be very careful, because you as an individual, you can do whatever you want. I don't care. But you as a father, you as a teacher, you as a community leader, you as a mufti, you better have done your homework, because you're going to answer Judgment Day, right? So for the guy in the street, really, it's like pluralism is the thing, really. It's like, oh, I understand that you should respect other people, right? And I guess as well, understand that there are certain stronger positions than other positions, right? Not everything that is said is very reliable, right? So you should just know, like principle, there's more than one opinion. Give me a fatwa that's been around for 1,000 years, right? That's what's useful to me on the street. But for the leader, it's like when you are putting yourself, when you're giving your own opinion, which disagrees with other people, when you're giving a fatwa, when you're giving this, like here I am in this room right here, I'm surrounded by all these books. On Judgment Day, my responsibility is just to convey what's in the book to you. That's the Shafi school. Here we go. I've given it to you. Whether it's you want to follow or not, whether anything else, whether I agree with it, like it's totally irrelevant. Whereas for many people, it's like it's very dangerous. Like, what do they think is better? Their own personal opinion, this and that. So they're giving an answer. Like, it better be reliable, just like a doctor. Like, I hope other people, other brain surgeon specialists would say the same kind of thing, because otherwise you're liable to be sued, right? Because this is not standard practice, right? So anybody in authority, it's really, really important for them to understand that. Yes, there's more than one way to look at things, but there are certain things that you should not step. You're walking way out into the gray areas now, and it's very, very dangerous. And the finger is going to be pointed at you tomorrow when somebody comes along and says, "What is this? How is this traditional Islam?" You allowed something that is just a minority opinion. What's going on? As opposed to, no, the Shafi school, meaning these 1,000 scholars said yes. Okay, don't you can't criticize me now. Or the Hanafi school said that, or the Maliki school, or whatever it is. Does that make sense, Nadir?
Yes, 100%. Until they start quoting the Shafi'i school, and they're not really
Exactly.
quoting the Shafi'i school.
Right. So then that's another thing. So basically, that's why like so the kind of lot the final conclusion on, you know, of these kind of like series of lectures is there's more than one answer, but your deen should be taken from somebody who is trained in one of the form of dhahib, right? Not for one of the form of dhahib, somebody who is trained in one of the form of dhahib. There's that caveat that you're mentioning there. Like you're not even trained in this, and this is where the problem is now in the Middle East. The Middle East is people have this. You do undergraduate, master's, PhD, and you're not actually trained by specialists in any of the form of dhahib. Your lecturer is not trained in the Maliki school or any of these things. They're just generally educated. They're a jack of all trades, master of none. Right? It's a problem, right? We see that as from Shafis, let alone somebody who's not even Shafi, right? And so it's a huge danger that you have a lecturer that is not actually specialized in any of the form of dhahib, because it means no deen is being conveyed. Just like somebody who is teaching the qira'at, but they don't actually know any of the qira'at specifically. They just know Arabic grammar, Arabic morphology, history of Quran, but they don't actually never studied Hafs and Asim like properly. They're just kind of familiar with the general ideas of these things. There's gonna be no tajweed. That's what it means. Like if that's how you teach tajweed, there will be no tajweed. And so, you know, may Allah protect us all. We'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala. But the most important thing is these last things, because everything else is just showbiz, right? Everything else is like details that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will look after for the ulama. But there's basic things, you know, one of the mashayikh, I believe, was Al-Arabi al-Darqawi. Like he said, you know, you don't worry about the things you don't know about. Be worried about things you do know about. So for the average Joe, madhab, no madhab, that's just like academic discussions. This kind of way beyond them, right? They don't even understand what a madhab is, and they will never. But they do understand what it means to look at somebody with scorn or lack of patience. And these like fundamental things on a daily basis. They do know what it means to look at something with lust. It's like you just did that. And then you looked again. They know what that is. And on Judgment Day, it's like, this is not something that's debated, right? Kibr is not something debated. Cruelness, rancor, having ill feelings towards somebody, right? That's not something that is hidden and difficult. And so, you know, often many people can get caught up in issues that are important, but no way as fundamental and immediate as anything else. You know, and so you know, so you just make sure you follow the form of dhahib. You make sure you try your best to do what is right. That's fantastic. But your number one, you meaning the generic listener, not, you know, your number one thing here is working on yourself, because these are these dangerous things that may Allah, you know, forgive us all. If we don't work on day in, day out, they will not disappear. May Allah forgive us all. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to reward the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for teaching us, and the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the Imams of the Deen and our teachers and our translator Sheikh Abdulaziz Fredericks and any other one who has been instrumental in any way to this class. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان الله وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
جزاكم خير.
بارك فيك.